The great halls of the Zirath Dominion were made to inspire fear. Towers of black stone stretched into the sky, their jagged edges shining under artificial suns. Soldiers in heavy armor lined the walkways, and banners of crimson silk waved with every gust of recycled wind. At the very center stood the throne of iron, and upon it sat Queen Cerathis, ruler of 1,000 worlds. Her presence was enough to silence entire armies. She wore a massive suit of ceremonial war armor, passed down from queen to queen. It was no ordinary machine. Its plates were carved from alloys unknown to most species, glowing with deep red runes. The suit was as much a symbol as it was a weapon, a reminder that the queen herself was the strongest warrior of the Dominion. But on this day, something was wrong. The moment the queen rose from her throne, a grinding sound echoed through the hall. The armor's joints shuddered, sparks dancing from one of its shoulder plates. A loud snap followed, and then smoke drifted from its chest unit. Gasps filled the chamber. No one dared to move, but fear rippled through the crowd. For centuries, the queen's armor had never failed. Cerathis growled, her voice shaking the pillars. "Who dares let my armor break before battle?" The nearest engineers, tall Zerath with long silver crests on their heads, fell to their knees. "My queen, forgive us. The systems, they are failing. The core is unstable. We cannot repair it in time." "Cannot?" The queen's voice was sharp as a blade. "You dare say cannot?" The engineers pressed their foreheads to the cold floor, trembling. "The sacred armor is beyond our skill. It is not meant to be touched, only honored." The queen slammed a fist against her chest plate. The impact made the hall tremble, but the armor groaned again, its power flickering like a dying star. Rage flared in her eyes. "You would have me march into battle in broken armor? You would have me appear weak before my enemies?" No one answered. No one dared. The silence dragged on until one of her generals, cautious but bold, spoke. "My queen, there is one who might help, but he is not one of us." Cerathis turned her burning gaze toward him. "Speak." The general bowed low. "A prisoner, captured during the raid on Sol 3. A human." Murmurs rose instantly. The word human carried little weight among the Dominion. To the Zerath, humans were young, reckless, and unrefined, a species of tinkers and wanderers, nothing more. "A human?" The queen spat the word like poison. "You insult me with this suggestion," but the general kept his head low. "Forgive me, my queen, but the human is said to be an engineer. He fixes machines. He has already repaired several of our transports while in captivity. Perhaps—" The queen's eyes narrowed. Her people believed in tradition, in perfection, in untouchable technology. But she was no fool. She needed her armor, and she needed it now. "Bring him," she commanded. The soldiers obeyed. Within minutes, the sound of chains echoed through the hall. The human prisoner was dragged forward, wrist bound in glowing cuffs. He looked small compared to the towering Zerath. His skin was pale, his dark hair messy, and his clothing torn from weeks of imprisonment. Yet his eyes, sharp, alert, restless, scanned the armor as if he already understood it. "This is the one?" Cerathis asked. The general nodded. "Michael Kane, human engineer." Michael straightened, despite the chains meeting the queen's gaze. "You're having power regulation issues," he said calmly. "Overheating in the conduits, probably caused by poor maintenance." The hall froze. No one ever dared speak to the queen so directly. The guards raised their weapons, ready to strike him down, but Cerathis lifted a hand to stop them. "You claim to know what ails my armor?" she asked, her voice like thunder. Michael shrugged. "I can hear it from here. Grinding gears, weak power flow, sparks at the joints. It's not divine, it's mechanical. Machines break. Machines can be fixed." The crowd gasped. To call the sacred armor just a machine was heresy, but Cerathis leaned forward, studying him. "And you think you can fix it?" Michael smiled, faintly. I don't think. I know. For a moment, the Queen's expression hardened, unreadable. Then slowly, she stood, the broken armor whining with every motion. Release him. The guards hesitated. My Queen. He is... I gave. An order, she snapped. The chains fell. Michael rubbed his wrists, stepping closer to the massive suit of alien armor. His hands moved with curiosity, tracing wires and panels the Zerath had never dared to touch. Behind him, the alien engineers hissed in anger. Blasphemy! He defiles the sacred construct. Michael ignored them. He muttered under his breath, words no one else understood. Loose couplings? Bad seals? Who the hell designed this mess? The Queen watched silently, arms crossed. Part of her wanted to strike him down for his insolence, yet another part, deep hidden, was intrigued. He worked with no fear, no reverence, only focus. Hours passed. Sparks flew as Michael pulled apart conduits, rerouted power lines, and sealed cracks with whatever tools he could scavenge. At one point, he even tore a strip from his own clothing to insulate a wire. The Zerath engineers whispered among themselves, horrified. To them, technology was sacred ritual. To the human, it was just work. Finally, as the artificial suns dimmed, the armor gave a deep, steady hum. The glowing runes shone brighter than before. The broken joints moved smoothly, stronger than they had in years. Michael stepped back, wiping grease from his hands. There, should hold for now. Maybe even better than before. The hall was dead silent. Queen Sarathis slowly raised her arm. The armor responded perfectly. No sparks, no grinding. She tested the joints, the core, the shields. Everything was flawless. Better than flawless. Her crimson eyes locked onto Michael. How? She demanded. Michael shrugged again, as if it were obvious. I fixed it. That's what engineers do. The Queen's stare lingered on him. Around her, generals and nobles shifted nervously, waiting for her judgment. Would she strike him down for his arrogance, or reward him? Finally, Sarathis let out a low, dangerous laugh. One human did what my finest could not. She leaned, closer, her voice dropping. You are either a fool, or something my dominion has underestimated. Michael didn't flinch. Maybe both. The Queen smiled, sharp as a blade. We will see. The night inside the royal fortress was never truly dark. The great halls of the Zerath dominion were lit by towering lamps that burned with blue plasma. Shadows stretched long across the walls, and the air carried the faint smell of metal and heat. Soldiers patrolled with heavy steps, their armor clanking against the stone floors. But deep inside the Queen's private chamber, a different sound echoed, one that none of the Zerath had ever heard before. The sound of a human humming. Michael. Kane sat on the ground with pieces of alien armor scattered around him. Wires, bolts, and panels lay in untidy piles. A glowing toolkit, borrowed, or perhaps stolen from the palace engineers, flickered beside him. His sleeves were rolled up, his fingers black with grease. He looked less like a prisoner, and more like a man back in his garage on Earth, fixing an old car. Queen Sarathis stood nearby, her arms crossed, her eyes glowing red in the dim light. She had dismissed her guards, though several watched nervously from the doorway. None of them trusted the human, and some whispered that allowing him to touch the sacred armor was a grave mistake. But the Queen was curious. She had watched him, earlier, bold enough to speak when others trembled, and now she watched again as he worked with confidence, not fear. He did not bow. He did not pray to the armor as her own people did. He simply touched it, examined it, and cursed under his breath when a piece didn't fit. What are you doing now? Sarathis asked at last. Her voice was calm, but it carried the weight of command. Michael didn't look up. Your conduit lines are misaligned. That's why the energy flow is unstable. Whoever put this together relied too much on perfect conditions. The moment things got dirty or worn, the whole system started to fail. The Queen frowned. Our engineers say the design is flawless, that it cannot be changed. Michael chuckled softly. Flawless? Lady, nothing's flawless. Everything breaks, everything wears out. That's why we fix things. The boldness of his words made the guards hiss in anger. One even stepped forward, hand on his weapon, but the queen raised a finger and froze him in place. You dare speak so of our sacred armor? She asked, narrowing her eyes. Michael finally looked up, meeting her gaze without fear. It's not sacred. It's a machine. If you treat it like a god, you'll never fix it. If you treat it like a machine, you can keep it running forever. The silence that followed was heavy. The Zirath engineers, standing in the back of the chamber, exchanged horrified looks. To them, the armor was divine, a symbol of their queen's unbroken rule. To hear it called just a machine was almost unthinkable. But Sarathis, she did not strike him down. Instead, she tilted her head, considering his words. Show me, she said, and so Michael worked. He pulled open the chest plate of the armor, revealing a core that pulsed with red light. Sparks crackled at the edges, threatening to burst into flames. The Zirath engineers stepped back, afraid of even being near it, but Michael leaned in close, studying every detail. You see this? He said, pointing at a glowing circuit line. This is supposed to carry energy smoothly. But look, at the connection, it's cracked. Power's leaking out instead of flowing through. Sarathis crouched beside him, the giant plates of her armor gleaming in the light. Our engineers said the energy loss was caused by impurity in the fuel source, Michael snorted. That's what people say when they don't want to admit. Their wires are loose. The queen blinked. Loose wires? Yeah. Michael pulled a tool from his kit and began tightening the connection. Your people design things to be perfect forever. Humans don't. We know stuff breaks, so we make it easy to repair. Honestly, if one of my professors back on Earth saw this wiring job, he'd fail whoever built it. The queen stared at him. You insult the work of my ancestors. Michael glanced at her with a grin. Maybe. But I just made it better. And to prove it, he pressed a button. The pulsing red light steadied, burning bright and smooth. The leaking sparks vanished. For the first time in centuries, the core of the armor ran at full strength. The Zirath engineers gasped. The queen's eyes narrowed, but this time not in anger. She touched the core, feeling its steady rhythm. Stronger, she whispered. Cleaner. Michael nodded. Simple fix. Surprised no one tried it. Hours passed as he continued his work. Where Zirath engineers used rituals and complex calculations, Michael used common sense. He patched holes with scrap metal, rerouted power lines with spare wires, and even used a piece of cloth from his own prison clothes as insulation. The Zirath whispered in shock. To them, this was madness. To Sarathis, it was something she had never seen before, creativity. At one point, she asked him, Why do you risk yourself? One wrong move and the core could explode. You would die instantly. Michael shrugged. Better me than your whole army when the armor fails in battle. She studied him carefully. In her empire, loyalty came from fear, from strict obedience. But this human, he had no reason to help. No promise of freedom, no reward. And yet, he worked, whistling and muttering as though fixing the most dangerous machine in the galaxy was nothing more than repairing a kitchen stove. Finally, just before the false dawn rose in the fortress, Michael stood and wiped the sweat from his brow. The armor towered above them, glowing with renewed power. Every joint moved smoothly, every rune shone brighter. It's done, he said simply. The queen approached, stepping into the armor. It sealed around her body, hissing as the power core connected. She raised her arm. The movement was smooth, faster than before. She clenched. Her fist and energy surged through the gauntlet with perfect control. She took a step, then another, and her smile grew sharper with every motion. It responds, as it has not in centuries. Michael leaned against the wall, exhausted but satisfied. Told you, machines are machines. You just needed someone willing to get their hands dirty. The chamber was silent, filled only with the hum of the armor. The engineers stared in disbelief. the soldiers in awe. The queen turned, her glowing eyes locked on the human. For a long moment she said nothing. Then her voice rang out like a blade. One human has done what my finest minds could not. Remember this night. The engineers bowed, shamed. The soldiers stood stiff, uncertain, and Michael Caine, prisoner and mechanic, simply shrugged. Glad it works, he said. Sarathis tilted her head, a strange thought forming in her mind. This human was dangerous, not because of strength or weapons, but because of his way of thinking. He saw problems differently. He refused to accept limits. The Zareth Dominion never rested for long. For every conquered world, another enemy rose to resist them. And now, only days after Michael Caine repaired the Queen's armor, the Dominion faced its greatest challenge in years. Scouts brought the news first. They arrived in the throne hall breathless, their armor scorched from long travel. "My queen," one shouted, falling to his knees. "The Karathi Empire has moved against us. Their fleets gather at the border, preparing for invasion." A heavy silence filled the room. The Karathi were no small foe. They were warlords, brutal and cunning, their ships sharp as blades and their armies vast. Where the Zerath ruled through discipline and fear, the Karathi ruled through fire and blood. The generals exchanged nervous glances. The Queen's armor had only just been restored. Was it strong enough? Could it turn the tide of war? Sarathis rose from her throne, the glowing plates of her suit moving with perfect grace. Every step shook the chamber, every motion a reminder of her strength. "Then let them come," she said, her voice cold as steel. "We will meet them in battle, and they will learn that the Dominion does not bend." The soldiers cheered. Yet beneath their cries, doubt remained. The human in the war room, Michael, was not supposed to be there. He was a prisoner still, though. His chains were gone, and he had been given a small room in the fortress instead of a cell. But when Sarathis called her council together, she ordered him to attend. He stood awkwardly at the edge of the war room, surrounded by towering generals, their polished armor gleaming. A star map floated above the table showing fleets, planets, and invasion routes. The Queen pointed at the glowing red markers. "The Karathi come in waves. Their warlord, Veyrik, leads them. He seeks to claim my throne." The generals growled, in anger shouting promises of loyalty and victory. Michael raised an eyebrow. Sorry to interrupt, but shouldn't we be thinking about their tactics instead of yelling?" The room went silent. Dozens of alien eyes turned toward him with pure hatred. A mere human prisoner daring to speak in the Queen's War Council. One general slammed his fist on the table. "How dare this animal speak before the Queen?" Michael held up his hands. "Relax, big guy. I'm just saying, wars aren't won by shouting. The Karathi wouldn't march in unless they thought they had an advantage. Maybe instead of screaming about how strong we are, we figure out what they're planning." The general moved to strike him, but Sarathis raised her hand. "Let him speak." The room froze. Michael coughed, realizing all eyes were on him. "Look, I don't know your enemies like you do, but I know machines and I know battles usually come down to small details. Supply chains, weak points, stuff that breaks at the worst time. You can't just assume your armor and ships will hold. You need backups, alternatives, ways to adapt when things go wrong." The generals sneered, muttering insults. But the Queen's gaze sharpened. She remembered how this human had saved her armor by noticing details her people had ignored. "You are suggesting," Sarathis said slowly, "that we prepare for failure." Michael shrugged. "Not prepare for failure. Prepare to fix things when they fail. Because something always fails, that's just life." The Queen tapped the table, thoughtful. For the first time, her war council considered not only their strength but also their weaknesses. The battle begins days later. The sky above the border world of Vareth burned. The Karathi fleets descended like blades of fire, their ships jagged and black, spitting plasma across the heavens. The Dominion fleet rose to meet them, silver warships moving in perfect formation. On the ground, soldiers marched, their chants echoing across the valleys. And at the very front stood Queen Sarathis, her armor glowing red, towering above her troops. Michael stood behind her dressed in simple armor borrowed from the palace armory. He was no soldier, but Sarathis had demanded he stay close. "If my armor fails," she had said, "you will fix it, even in the heat of battle." Michael had laughed nervously, but she wasn't joking. The clash began with thunder. Starships fired from orbit, explosions lighting up the skies. On the ground, the Korathi charged, massive beasts covered in spiked armor, wielding heavy plasma axes. Their war cries shook the earth. The Zerath met them with discipline, shields locked, spears of energy thrusting forward, and then Sarathis moved. Her armor roared to life, and she leapt into the fray. Every strike of her gauntlets shattered enemy weapons. Her shield absorbed blasts that would have killed a dozen soldiers. The modifications Michael had made gave her speed and strength she had never known. She was unstoppable. The Zerath soldiers fought harder with every move their queen made. They shouted her name, their fear vanishing as they saw her crush the Korathi war beasts one after another. Michael, standing behind the lines, could hardly believe his eyes. "Okay," he muttered to himself. "Maybe fixing her suit was the best decision I ever made." Trouble in the midst, but battles never stay perfect. In the middle of the fight, a sharp alarm rang from inside the queen's armor. Sarathis staggered, her shield flickering. Sparks flew from her shoulder. Michael's heart sank. He recognized that sound. Something inside the power core was straining. The queen snarled, smashing aside an enemy warrior, but her movement slowed. Michael grabbed his toolkit. Without thinking, he ran through the battlefield, dodging soldiers and blasts. A Korathi warrior swung a plasma axe at him, but a Zerath soldier cut the enemy down just in time. Michael ducked, rolled, and finally reached the queen. "Problem?" he shouted over the chaos. Sarathis gritted her teeth. Shields. Faltering. Core. Unstable. Michael didn't wait. He climbed onto her back like a mechanic fixing a giant machine, tools in hand. "Hold still." "On a battlefield," she growled. "Unless you want this thing to explode, yeah." Bullets and plasma bolts zipped past them as Michael worked, furiously. He pulled open a panel, sparks flying in his face. "Loose regulator, damn it, who designed this?" He twisted wires, reconnected circuits, and slammed the panel shut. The armor hummed back to life. Shields flared strong again. The queen roared, her fist glowing with power as she slammed it into the ground, sending a shockwave that threw back. Dozens of enemies. Michael clung to her armor, coughing from the smoke but smiling. "Told you. Always need a backup plan." Victory at a price with her armor restored mid-battle, Sarathis became a storm of fire and steel. The Korathi faltered, their warriors crushed, their ships pushed back. At last, their warlord Varric stood, before her a mountain of muscle and steel, his blade as long as a starship cannon. The two clashed, their strikes shaking the battlefield. Michael watched from behind, ready to leap in if the armor failed again. He could do nothing against a warlord, but he knew one thing. He would not let the queen fall because of a broken machine. The duel raged, sparks flying, blades crashing. And then with a roar, Sarathis drove her fist through Varric's chest, her armor glowing brighter than the sun. The Korathi broke, their army scattered, their fleet retreated. The Dominion had won. A queen's realization. That night, the campfires of the Dominion lit the valleys. Soldiers feasted, singing of their queen's glory. Michael sat on a crate, exhausted, cleaning his tools. His hands were burned, his face smeared with soot, but he was alive. Sarathis approached, still in her armor. Though her helmet was open, she stood over him like a towering shadow. "You risked your life," she said. Michael looked up. "Well, yeah. Your armor fails. Your army fails. Figured it was important." The queen studied him for a long moment. "My people believe perfection is eternal. But you expect things to break. And because of that, you are ready when they do." Michael smiled faintly. "That's the human way. Nothing's perfect. But everything can be fixed." For the first time, Sarathis bowed her head slightly, not in weakness but in respect. Perhaps, she said, that is what makes your kind dangerous. Michael blinked. Dangerous? I was just fixing wires. The Queen's sharp smile returned. Exactly. Victory had returned to the Zerath Dominion, but peace never lasted long. Even in triumph, shadows lingered. Among the Empire's engineers, whispers of anger had grown into venomous plots. They could not bear that a mere human, a fragile creature, from a primitive species had accomplished what centuries of Zerath knowledge could not. These machines are sacred, one engineer hissed to another, his voice low and trembling, and a human touches them, improves them without fear, without reverence. It is an insult to the Dominion, to the Queen, to everything we have built. Another nodded, eyes cold. If the Queen dies, if her armor fails again, the human cannot save her, and we shall reclaim our honor. Plans were formed in secret, hidden within the shadows of the palace and the fortress. Suspicion in the court Queen Sarathis had returned to her throne, yet she could not shake the memory of the battlefield. The Karathi had been beaten, yes, but her armor had faltered. The thought of it almost failing again made her pulse quicken. Michael Caine sat nearby, cleaning his tools, quietly noting the subtle cracks and sparks that the Zerath engineers never saw. He had repaired her armor once, yes, but he knew the war was far from over. The Queen's enemies would not wait for a perfect moment. They would strike in her weakness. Michael, Sarathis said one morning, her voice calm but sharp. You do not trust all my engineers, do you? He shrugged, not looking up. Some of them already tried to get me killed. You don't notice it? They hate me. They hate what I've done. If they get a chance, they will sabotage you. The Queen studied him carefully. And you? You would not betray me? Michael smirked faintly. I fix things. I don't destroy them. That's my job. Sarathis nodded slowly. Good. Then stay close. The warning it was 2 nights later when the first warning arrived. A scout rushed into the palace, breathless, carrying news of a Karathi raid near one of the outer colonies. The Karathi are striking where we are weakest, the scout said. They move fast, faster than our fleet. We cannot hold the colony alone. The Queen's eyes narrowed. Then we must go, prepare the fleet. Michael packed his tools into a small satchel. And what about the armor? He asked. It worked fine last time, but you will ride with me, she said simply. The engineers exchanged nervous glances. They were supposed to maintain the armor, not watch a human touch it. Betrayal in motion. The battle began at dawn. Varith's outer colonies were under attack. Karathi ships blazed across the skies, their weapons lighting the morning clouds with fire. On the ground, alien war beasts charged, axes raised. Sarathis moved first. Her armor gleamed, her every motion precise and lethal. But almost immediately, a subtle misalignment struck. One of the shoulder plates froze for a fraction of a second. Sparks leapt from the seams. Michael froze in recognition. Sabotage, he muttered under his breath. From the shadows, 2 Zerath engineers had tampered with the core regulators. Their hands had been hidden in the armor's maintenance chambers, tightening bolts wrong, swapping circuits, inserting defective components, all in the hope that the Queen would fail in battle. The Queen fought on, unaware that betrayal had touched her. She smashed a Karathi warrior aside, her gauntlets glowing with energy, her shield deflecting blasts. But every step required more effort. The armor's power wavered, and she could feel it. Michael jumped into action. He ran across the battlefield, dodging plasma bolts and heavy stomps from alien beasts. The soldiers parted instinctively, some shouting in confusion at the sight of a human running boldly into the fray. "Hold your line," he yelled. "I'll fix her." The Queen turned her head slightly. She saw him climbing the armor as bullets and sparks flew around them. She gritted her teeth. "Michael, get off! You will die! And your armor will fail if I don't," he shouted, fixing the armor. Mid-battle, Michael reached the shoulder plate and quickly tore it open. Inside, wires hung loose. Circuits burned. The Karathi fought nearby, but he did not hesitate. Sparks flew in his face. Smoke filled his lungs. His hands burned, but he kept working. Come on, come on, he muttered. One of the Zerath engineers who had sabotaged the armor noticed him and screamed. He lunged to stop Michael, but a Karathi blast threw him aside. Michael twisted wires, replaced damaged connectors, and used strips of his shirt as insulation. He had no time for ceremony, no time for proper tools, just action. Sweat poured from his brow, but the armor's hum grew stronger with each movement. Finally, with a loud snap, the circuits locked into place. The armor hummed steadily, glowing, brighter than ever. Sarathis felt it immediately. The armor surged with power. She roared and slammed her fist into a group of enemy warriors, sending them flying. She moved faster, hit harder, and her shields flared in perfect synchronization. Michael climbed down, his clothes torn and face blackened, but he smiled faintly. Fixed. Again. The queen barely glanced at him, too focused on the battlefield, but her respect grew silently. Turning the tide with her armor fully restored, Sarathis became a whirlwind of destruction. Karathi warlords fell one after another. Her soldiers, inspired by her unbroken power, pushed forward with renewed strength. The betraying engineers were exposed in the chaos, caught trying to flee the battlefield. Soldiers dragged them away, and Sarathis decided their punishment later. For now, victory was the priority. Michael remained close, tools ready for any further problems. He had seen the first signs of sabotage, and he was ready to react instantly. The battle raged for hours, but eventually the Karathi were forced to retreat. Their fleet withdrew, leaving the outer colonies under Zerath control. Aftermath. The battlefield was quiet once more, save for the groans of wounded soldiers and the crackle of burning wreckage. Sarathis stood atop a fallen war beast, her armor humming steadily, spotless despite the fight. She turned to Michael, who was cleaning soot and dust from the armor. "You saved me again," she said, her voice low but firm. Michael shrugged. "I told you, machines break. I fix them. That's my job." "But the betrayal?" she began. Michael looked at her, his eyes sharp. "Not your fault. Jealousy is everywhere. You can't change it, but you can survive it, and you can fix the things that matter when the time comes." Sarathis nodded slowly. She realized something important. Strength was not only in armor or weapons. It was in intelligence, quick thinking, and courage, the qualities that Michael had shown again and again. She stepped closer, her towering form almost looming over him. "Human," she said quietly, "your kind is dangerous. You see problems differently, and you act where others hesitate. That is valuable." Michael smiled faintly. "Yeah, that's us. Fix things that break. Make stuff work. Don't panic." The queen studied him for a long moment, her glowing eyes thoughtful. "Perhaps the Dominion has underestimated humans. Perhaps it is time to change that." The battlefield was quiet. The fires of the Karathi invasion had faded, leaving scorched land and shattered war machines in their wake. Soldiers of the Zerath Dominion moved carefully among the ruins, tending to the wounded and salvaging what they could. The sky glowed with the remnants of energy blasts, painting the clouds in shades of red and gold. In the center of the camp, Queen Sarathis stood tall. Her armor gleamed despite the scars of battle, humming steadily, as if it had absorbed the power of victory itself. But her gaze was fixed not on the battlefield, nor on her victorious soldiers. It was on one man. Michael Kane, the human engineer who had repaired her armor not once, but twice, stood nearby. Dirt smeared his pale skin, his hands blackened with soot and grease. His tools were scattered at his feet, evidence of yet another miraculous repair during the heat of combat. The soldiers whispered among themselves. A human had changed the tide of battles and survived where many Zerath had not. Some muttered doubts about the species they had long considered weak. Others stared in awe, unsure if they had ever seen such courage. The queen's gaze did not waver. Recognition of the human Sarathis stepped forward. her heavy boots leaving deep impressions in the soil. She stopped before Michael, who instinctively straightened, unsure whether to bow or run. "Human," the Queen began, her voice echoing across the field. "You have done what my greatest warriors could not. You have repaired what my people declared impossible, and you have saved me with your hands and your mind." Michael scratched the back of his neck. Thanks, my Queen. I was just doing my job." "Your job?" she repeated, one eyebrow raised beneath the glowing visor of her armor. "You risked life, limb, and freedom. You acted when my engineers failed. You acted when even I hesitated. That is not merely a job. That is courage and intelligence, and it is human," the soldiers murmured. The Queen's statement rang with authority, and for the first time they realized that their empire had underestimated a species they had always seen as fragile and insignificant. A lesson for the Dominion. The Queen gestured toward her court, where the Zerath engineers still lingered, their faces pale with shame. "You," she said, pointing to the one who had tried to sabotage the armor, "thought your loyalty and knowledge were enough, but your fear of imperfection blinded you. You failed." The guilty engineers bowed, unable to speak. "And you," the Queen continued, pointing to Michael, "have shown what my empire lacks: adaptability, courage, the ability to act when others freeze. Your kind is dangerous, yes, but valuable. Perhaps the greatest weapon of the Dominion is not technology or brute strength, but the mind of a human who refuses to surrender to impossibility." Michael blinked. Thanks again, my Queen. That's a lot of praise." The Queen's voice softened slightly. "You have earned more than praise. You have earned a place at my side, as engineer and advisor. You will no longer be my prisoner. You will guide us, teach us, and remind us that tradition alone is not always enough." Michael swallowed. He had never expected such recognition from an alien queen, much less from one who had once threatened him with death. "Sounds good," he said finally. "I'll do my best." Humanity's edge over the next weeks, Michael worked closely with the Queen. He trained Zerath engineers in human methods, improvisation, rapid problem-solving, and practical thinking. The soldiers began to see the difference his mind made. Equipment functioned better, weapons were maintained more efficiently, and armor performance improved in ways even the Queen's court had never imagined. The Queen watched him carefully, learning as much as she taught. She realized that strength was not just in armies or machines, it was in adaptability, in thinking outside rigid rules. One evening, as Michael inspected a newly repaired fleet of battle transports, she approached him. "Human," she said quietly, "you have changed the way I see the Dominion, and perhaps the galaxy itself. Your kind, fragile though it may appear, is not to be underestimated." Michael shrugged, wiping grease from his hands. "We humans have a habit of fixing things no one else can. Doesn't matter if it's a machine or a problem bigger than ourselves." The Queen nodded. "And perhaps for the first time in centuries, the Dominion is stronger because of that. Habit. A new era, the Zerath Dominion, shifted. Where once rigid tradition ruled, innovation and adaptability gained respect. Engineers no longer feared human methods. Soldiers learned to rely on strategy and human ingenuity alongside their physical might, and the Queen's reign grew more secure. Michael's place was secure as well. He traveled with Sarathis, repairing machinery, advising on battle strategies, and teaching those willing to learn that problems, no matter how complex, could be solved. Yet he remained humble. He never sought titles or honors. To him it was simple. If something is broken, it deserves to be fixed. The Queen often watched him work, a faint smile on her lips. She had called him dangerous once, but now she called him necessary. Humanity had found its edge, not in the strength of its warriors, but in the courage and creativity of a single engineer. The Queen's question. One evening, high above the battlefield, in her private chamber, the Queen asked Michael directly, her voice soft, almost curious. "Tell me, human, why did you risk yourself for me? Your species has no stake in the wars of the Zerath. No loyalty compels you. Yet you acted when others could not. Michael leaned against the railing, looking out over the horizon where distant planets shimmered. Because something broken deserves to be fixed. Doesn't matter if it's armor or a weapon or a kingdom. If you leave it broken, it will fail, and someone will get hurt. I just fix things, that's all. Sarathis considered his words carefully. She realized then that this simple philosophy, the human way, was a force no empire could ignore. Future. Together. From that day forward, humans were no longer seen as weak or insignificant in the Dominion. Michael Caine's actions became legend. He had saved the Queen, altered the course of wars, and taught a powerful empire the value of human ingenuity. The Queen honored him publicly. In front of all generals and soldiers, she proclaimed, 1. Human has done what thousands of Zerath could not. Respect him, learn from him. Let this be a lesson that strength is not only in power, but in the will to act, the mind to solve, and the courage to fix what others leave broken. Michael bowed slightly, a small, humble gesture that carried enormous meaning. Around him, the soldiers cheered, not just for the Queen, but for the human who had proven them wrong. Humanity's place in the galaxy is. The Dominion rebuilt and strengthened its fleets. Michael's influence grew. He traveled to new colonies, taught alien engineers, and solved problems no Zerath mind had considered possible. The Queen trusted him implicitly, and in that trust, humanity found its place, not through brute force, not through conquest, but through its unique ability to think, adapt, and act where others hesitate. Michael Caine, the lone human engineer, had not only fixed armor, he had fixed the perception of his species in an empire that had once thought them fragile and insignificant. Sarathis stood beside him one evening, her armor gleaming under the setting suns of Vareth. You are remarkable human, she said. Michael shrugged with a faint grin. I just fix things, my Queen, that's all.